I'm just, okay, great.
Okay, we're good. Sylvia Alexander
We
is coming in.
do have a quorum, Margaret.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, please excuse my transportation. I had to attend a funeral, so I'm just getting settled now. So thank you everybody for being here. I will show my face shortly. But thank you all for being here. It's so great to see you. Thank you, Cesar, for being here. We're super excited to hear your presentation. I've had the benefit of already working with you, which has been super impressive. And just really excited to have you here in the community board. So that being said, 2 new members, we're thrilled to have both of you, 2 stellar community board members who have a wealth of expertise and are very passionate about this work. So I'm really excited to have both of you on this committee. Did you want to say a few words about yourselves or give a little bit of context to the work that you do?
I can go if Julia doesn't want to go first. Well, first to say hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you to the chair, Laura Polter, which I understand suggested that I'm joining this committee, which I wanted to join. So my name is Camelia Tepelius. I am community board aid member in my 3rd year now. I am an immigrant and a parent and an advocate for special needs. But in my work life, I'm the executive director of an economic development organization on the other side of the Bronx. And I was very involved and very active, even as a non-member, in the proceedings of this committee, following very closely the report being put together. And I'm very grateful for being able now to join as a board. And again, thank you to the chair and to the chair of the committee. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Julia Gomez. I am an LMSW for the last, I'm going to round and do 15 because my head hurt. I'm currently also in the 7th year of my dissertation, which is on the effect of race on housing segregation amongst Latinos. I also currently work for the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in the Crisis Prevention and Intervention Unit in the Bureau of Health Promotion for Justice Impacted Populations. There's a lot of acronyms. I think I got all of them right this time. Thank you for having me.
Thank you both. Since we have quorum, should we cut to the chase on handling the 2 minutes that we're responsible for? And then we'll cut, and then we'll have Cesar take over. Any edits, reservations, concerns about the the June and November minutes? I overlooked the June minutes in our previous meeting. I didn't realize that they hadn't been approved.
I'm okay with them.
Okay, great. So is that a motion?
Motion to approve. This is Bob Finuzzi.
Cool.
Second.
Aye.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, great. I'm so thrilled to have Cesar here from Latino Justice to speak about redistricting and how important it is to not only the community board, but our city, state. So Cesar, I was hoping that you could introduce yourself and give us an overview of what you all are working on and some of the redistricting efforts in New York.
Great. Thank you, Margaret, for inviting me. I had the pleasure of working with her and crafting some testimony about the community that she serves. And that was really my introduction. So my name is Cesar Ruiz. I am a legal fellow at Latino Justice, and I'm doing a 2-year project that's really focused on voting rights and redistricting within the Latino community based in New York, but working in both New York and Florida. And really, the intention with our redistricting efforts in New York are kind of expanding access to the Latino community. A lot of work was done around census, and we know that redistricting is something that kind of follows that and is really closely aligned with that. So it's really critical. Our work is really focusing on building a redistricting advocacy campaign. So we want to do a lot of community engagement, education, and really have folks involved in this process that historically it hasn't been the case. So that's a little bit of a brief overview. I have like a small short presentation, but that's just insight into my role and the scope of my project. So with that, if there's no questions, I'm just going to go into a little bit of a presentation. I have like additional slides. I wasn't sure how much time I had, but I'm going to go through as much as I can and then leave space for questions on the back end. So I'm going to start sharing my screen.
Tanya, also, I'm on my computer now, so if you needed to make me co-host to manage the meeting after you leave, I'm happy to do that.
So at first, I just want to talk a little bit about Latino Justice. Latino Justice Pro-Def is an organization that was founded in 1972, and its focus was really on advocacy for Latino groups, Puerto Rican groups, and it has expanded now to really encompass broad areas of immigration, economic development, voting rights, criminal justice. And so these are areas that we're really focused on expanding access, expanding awareness, and really litigating and advocating for our community, ensuring accountability and equitability under the law. So that's just a brief overview. And tonight we're just going to go over kind of some of the ins and outs about redistricting, why it's important, and how people can get involved. So first, just wanted to start with what is redistricting. It is a process that many people, it might be on their purview, they may have no idea. I started like a few months ago, and it was something that I had to kind of learn a lot about. There's two concepts. There's reapportionment, and that involves the redistribution of seats in Congress, and that goes in hand with redistricting, which is the process of redrawing the congressional lines and legislative electoral districts. And that happens once every 10 years, which is why it's such an important, and it goes hand in hand with the census. So the census is gathering these points of data, assessing what changes have happened in the communities, and then how does that affect representation. And there's really three levels to it. There is the federal congressional level, and that really refers to reapportionment. And so there's been a lot of conversations about the loss of a seat within New York, and that has to do with the number of individuals that were counted in the census. And so in August, they dropped data files that kind of discern the numbers of individuals within the state, and then they're apportioned towards the population that they have. So we have 26 seats, so we lost 1 seat. So we have less representation on the federal level. And then the second piece is on the state level, which is state congressional lines and its state representation in both the Senate and the Assembly. And hand in hand with these concepts is the redistricting is really drawing of the lines, which determines what kind of resources you get and what kind of access you have, and then your political representation. So that's just a brief overview, and those are two concepts that get used a lot, but they are two things that are different. So I'm going to move on to the second, and this is just a visual representation. So there's the 2010 numbers, which were used for the basis to draw our lines for the past 10 years, and that determined our political representation on all of those three levels, which was congressional and then the state houses. So as you can see in this example, there's a population of about 25 people, and that's just a number for an example. But between 2010 and 2020, there was a change in population, whether it's an increase or a decrease or even just a shift of population. This process is one that looks at kind of those changes and tries to make sure that representation matches the changes in fluctuation, whether people moved up or people moved into the city or they moved out west. This is a process once every 10 years where we kind of look at where people have gone, how the population has shifted, and what representation each section deserves according to those numbers. And so next, wanted to just move to why redistricting is important. The opportunity to elect a representative of your choosing and who best represents your interests and interests of your community. And this was something that when I was meeting with Margaret that we discussed about kind of like the resources, how are people having access to the representatives and what kind of accountability do they have to their constituents. Redistricting kind of determines the geographical. So if an individual is drawn in a certain way, their access to the representative or resources, which is critical to like all the work that we do, is really impacted. And so we have to look at this. And that brings me to the next point, which is the resource allocation. It boils down to funding for your local transportation, roads, schools, hospitals, libraries, and community organizations. So all of this work is really impacted by this process that most see as, you know, a political partisan process, but that can really be, in New York, you can be very involved in kind of advocating for your needs. And the people best in that best position are the individuals, that are serving on community boards, but also, you know, not only a part of the community, but serve the community. And so there's many ways that you can really be involved. Redistricting can impact the quality of your air, water, your schools, access to housing, transportation, business. So it is really something that cuts deep. It's not something that everyone has accessible. Again, it's one of these processes that happens 10 years. It's really expert driven. And so a lot of our work is focusing on kind of expanding access. And then the last point is really that these are election districts that are set for 10 years. So it's not something that is small in scale. It really is something that impacts the next 10 years of our work. So those are just a few of the reasons among the many why. And so the next slide is really going to be addressing some of the concepts that come up in discussions and that affect. And so there's a concept called the gerrymandered district. And there's really, this occurs when electoral districts are drawn in a manner that manipulate the district lines in order to influence the outcome of elections and keep incumbents in power. Like these are examples of kind of ways that it can hinder certain groups from having power to elect their own representatives. Cracking is a concept that you'll hear a lot within this work, and it's kind of dividing communities in a way that their power or their representation is limited, and then packing it really concentrates individuals within an area to really limit their ability to kind of create change or create accountability. So those are just two concepts that really come up a lot within the work, and it's really kind of the nitty-gritty of like map drawing, and it's concepts that kind of are instrumental to understanding how representation within your community can be affected. So the next piece is redistricting and gerrymandering. And so with this, just kind of identifying that they are two different things, because a lot of the coverage kind of seems to distort or simplify these, but these are two concepts that are very different. Redistricting is the process by which voting districts are redrawn to reflect the population changes, and gerrymandering is the redrawing of electoral districts to gain a political advantage over another party. And there's two types of gerrymandering. There's racial gerrymandering, which is a race-based analysis that kind of tries to affect through the lens of race the way that voting power or ability to elect or ability that you can kind of get resources to your community. And then there's political gerrymandering, which is partisan. It has to do with red and blue, and it has to do with like a more political tint. And those are two kind of concepts that play. Supreme Court on the legal side has kind of ruled that political gerrymandering by states in their process is allowed, but racial gerrymandering is not allowed. And so those are concepts that kind of come into play as you start to draw these maps. Next, I wanted to just talk a little bit about a community of interest, because this is kind of the metric that you use when you're assessing how to draw. And I'll take a step back and just say that in this process, there are state members of the state body that draw, and then there's advocates that also take on some of that. So you get programming, and then you try and develop some of these tools to kind of account for changes, account for community needs, and community of interest is one of the tools that we use to advocate for our community needs. And so a community of interest is a group of people concentrated in a geographic area who share similar interests and priorities, whether it be social, cultural, ethnic, economic, or religious. A community of interest is likely to have similar legislative and community concerns and interests, and they would benefit from representation in a single electoral district. Another way of understanding is that it's a simple way that a community tells a story about itself, about its neighbors, what they share in common, and what makes them unique. As we know, kind of in the various roles that we may all serve, communities are very different. They have very different needs, and kind of understanding that and being able to advocate through that is really through a community of interest lens, where individuals who make up that community or serve that community are able to say, these are our needs based on our culture or based on kind of some of the issues or the gaps in services that we face. So this is a helpful metric to kind of advocate for lines to be drawn in a certain way. And it's something that we use within our work to advocate for our communities. And race and ethnicity can play a role in defining a community of interest, but it can't be the sole definition. So while we look at race, it's not a dispositive factor, it's one among many. And we say, what are the social and economic needs? What binds this community together? Are they politically cohesive? And do they have the power within the ways that we've drawn this to be able to advocate and choose a candidate that would represent their interests? So that's a little bit about community of interest. Next, I wanted to just move into discussing kind of a little bit about the New York process. In 2014, there was a constitutional amendment which established the Independent Redistricting Commission. Previously, redistricting was conducted by the New York State Legislative Task Force on Demographic Research and Apportionment, and it was known as LAP4, and that was a purely legislative body. With the Independent Redistricting Commission, it was a 10-member commission. Four are selected by Democratic members of the legislative body, 4 are selected by the Republicans, and then within those 8, they each select 1 additional commissioner. And so it's a 10-member body, and they're tasked with drawing boundaries for both congressional and state legislative redistricting. And so this is new. This is the first cycle where we've had engagement with the commission. It is a process that allows for community input in a way that we previously didn't have. And so with that is a lot of uncertainty because we don't know which way this is going to go. But we have had the opportunity to testify in the hearings and give voice to kind of some of the community concerns, and communities have been able to come out and really engage in a process where their voices are a part of the record and are really able to kind of affect the way that these lines are being drawn. And so it is like a great step and a positive step in the right direction. And so I wanted to just go in and give like a brief overview. There's a lot on this slide, but I'll say that it started in August, and that's when the census data was released. And so the census data is just demographic data about where individuals live, what populations. And so that was kind of the basis for then their work to begin. So in September 15th, they released a first draft of maps. And that was like kind of the first iteration of what their maps would be. And then in October and November, they did public hearings. And this is the public comment period where they're able to kind of assess there was 2 sets of maps that were drawn. It was the names and the letters plan. And one was released by the Republican elected officials, not officials, but it was the Republican appointed commissioners and then the Democratic appointed commissioners. And so communities had a chance to really engage and show support for either one. And then advocacy groups had the chance to put forward their own maps that represent their community interests. Right now, we're currently we're engaging, after the public hearings, it's now gone to the Independent Redistricting Commission. I think we have our final hearing this Sunday, and it's an all-state hearing. But the hearings involved like regions up in New York State. And so they had regional approach and kind of how they engaged in this process. And they really just sat and asked folks for feedback on their plans. But advocacy groups also put together their own maps. And so now they're going through the process of submitting their final proposal, which will be voted on and then sent to the legislature. And as you can see, it kind of follows. So it's after engaging in these testimony, the hearings, it'll be proposed to the legislature. The legislature can approve it or they can reject the plan. And so from there, it kind of goes through a process of approval, which is pending. This is the first time there's some uncertainty about whether, because there were 2 maps released, whether one can be made. So there is hope, but it's a wait and see approach. So within this time period until January, we're working with groups to kind of identify and see, and then after kind of advocate for what our needs still are. And so that's just like a brief overview.
Cesar, could I pause you there for a second? I heard some people take themselves off mute. So did you want to take questions now, or do you want to wait until the end? And if anyone had a question, if they could just raise their hand.
Sure, I can do either or. I have a few more slides,
Okay.
but I can stop here if there's pressing questions.
I don't see any hands raised for now, so I guess you can keep going, and if I see any pop up, oh, Julie, go right ahead.
Sure.
Sorry about the crying face. I was looking for the raising of the hand. I know you mentioned the thing about the 10-member commission. Are they? You said they were selected, or are they elected? How do they pick the 4 Democrats and the 4 Republicans?
So they're selected through, they're appointed by the legislature. So 4 are appointed. It was an attempt to be a nonpartisan commission. So 4 are elected from Republican members of the state legislature, and then 4 are elected from the Democratic. And then within, and they're appointed, sorry, because it can get confusing. They're appointed by each body, one set of Democratic legislature members and then Republican. And then within those 4, they each select one other commissioner.
Okay, so it's the bodies themselves that are selected.
Yes.
For. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, that's the only hand I see right now, so go ahead, Cesar.
Perfect. Next, I just wanted to go into briefly kind of what some of the redistricting requirements are, like what the law mandates. A concept called contiguity just means that you can travel from any point in the district to another point in the district without crossing the district boundary. And so that's a concept that when you're drawing, it has to all kind of connect, is kind of like a concept. And then there's a concept of compactness. It just has to be compact. It can't be squiggly lines. It has to be drawn in a way that is natural and not oddly shaped to kind of distort or pack or crack or some of those concepts that came earlier. It has to be something that's very compact. Competition, the lines can't be drawn in a way to discourage competition or for the purpose of favoring an incumbent. This was a big sticking point because traditionally this process had been used to favor partisan parties and partisan actors. And so with this, the requirement is that you're really assessing what are the changes in population and not trying to just benefit one party over another. Political boundaries is also another concept. The redistricting plan must heed county and municipal boundaries. So you're just kind of assessing what traditional boundaries exist, and you have to just kind of respect those. And then there's also the concept of single member districts, which is just that they have to be single member, like representative districts. And so those are just some of the basic concepts among the many. Like factors that are considered but not required are also communities of interest. And so that's you identifying community needs, what they have or what they need, what political representation they really have to, and I see that there's a hand raised, but that's also another, and then it's kind of assessing the political cohesiveness of groups. And so I see that David Gelman has a raised hand.
Yeah, just a quick question. I don't understand what must be chosen by single member district. I don't know what that means.
So single member district, per my understanding, is that there's a single like representative like on the assembly level.
But aren't all districts of all types single member? I mean, there's only one congressman per district, there's only one senator per district, and then one assembly member per district. So I just don't understand what it means.
That's something that is like a little bit, even to me, I'd have to dig a little bit more into that requirement because it's not something that we've really engaged with really, but it is something that's within like the constitutional framework and that we have awareness of.
Something tells me Bob Fanuzzi has the answer.
Not right now. I just wanted to ask that all questions be directed to the chair and that we let we finish the presentation. We'll come back and I'm sure we have a lot of questions. Thank you.
Okay, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the advocacy efforts that our group is involved with. So in New York City, Latino Justice, along with Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund and the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, are a part of the Unity Map Coalition. And really, this is an effort to ensure that all racial groups, particularly Latino, Black, and Asian, are protected in this process. And so we've gone through the process of drawing maps that are reflective of feedback that we've gotten from community-based organizations, community members, and really engaged in a process to make sure that they're equitably represented, which hasn't been the case in past cycles. There's been a lot of, within the past 4 cycles, we've done efforts standalone to kind of advocate for our communities, but this is an effort to really come together and have a collective protection through map drawing. And so with this, we're kind of able to take some accountability and kind of build support around some of the plans that directly protect our community. And the importance of the Unity Map Coalition in New York is Coalition Map elevates the voices of community of colors, which is something that we all strive to do in our work. It builds greater opportunities to elect candidates of choice in the next decade, and that's really important in terms of us identifying areas of need for our community members, and then those needs being met by individuals that are elected. It establishes baselines that maximize minority representation. So historically and throughout the country, there has been an issue, and the numbers kind of support that showing of a lack of representation within each group. And so this is really an effort to kind of make sure that we're protecting our community's interest and their representation, and that there is equity within that system. And then the most important is keeping communities of interest together. The social and economic interest really speak to kind of how individuals, when they elect officials, can stay together and their needs are actually met. And so this process was really focused on kind of engaging that and then being able to kind of reflect that in the map drawing process. So then I wanted to just move into what does a fair redistricting process look like? Open in the public, and public's able to actively engage at every step of the process. Through the Independent Redistricting Commission, we've had ability to kind of testify and get the community out and get it involved and get folks to really say, these are my needs, this is how I define my community. And it's important that when you're drawing these lines, you consider it. Second is that the maps that are drawn in a manner that accurately reflect changes in the population. Historically, this hasn't always been the case. Sometimes populations are shifted or lines are drawn in a way to kind of disadvantage certain groups or certain populations or certain areas. And so this is why we kind of, in our advocacy, are really advocating for the numbers to be reflected in terms of loss of population, gain of population. And so this is a really important concept that we strive to endeavor and hold accountable to the individuals that are drawing these lines. And then third is safeguarding racial minority groups from maps, which have the effect of diminishing their ability to elect candidates of their choice. And this is really important when we talk about resource distribution, when we talk about voting, when we talk about elections, and we talk about what are the outcomes and how does this affect the work that we do, and how does this affect the community members. So we want to make sure that we're safeguarding racial minority groups who historically have been shut out from these processes and not considered in a meaningful way. And that leads to many issues in terms of the services that they're able to receive, the resources that they're able to receive. And so it's really important that we kind of safeguard that within this process. Next, I wanted to just talk a little bit about how folks can get involved if there's an interest. So educating and engaging community members about the importance of redistricting and impact is really important. Not a lot of folks have an awareness. I can tell you, I didn't have much awareness before I started this work, but I've become really involved and now have developed my understanding, and I've made it my work to really engage individuals in that process. It's really important that we understand kind of the impact. These are lines that stay around for 10 years and determine the resource allocation, they determine our representation. And so these are critical things that really affect the way that we are able to kind of exist. And so educating and engaging community is a really important. Second is sharing and creating resources for members. That's something that at Latino Justice, we also take on. And we really think it's important to kind of just expand access in a meaningful way, and resources that kind of break down these really complex processes in a way that's accessible is something that we can all get involved with. Third, I would say just organizing and voicing community concerns through collective and coordinated actions on proposed maps or potential legislative bodies that may come up. Our voice and the power that we have, not only as community board members, as constituents, is very powerful. At the end of the day, all of these actions exist in the court of public opinion. And so if we're able to shape the narrative and speak meaningfully to our needs, we're able to kind of hold these processes accountable in a way that will create maps that reflect our communities and our needs. And so it's really important. The last is just remaining engaged and aware. While the hearings may have passed on the state level, the process remains far from over on the municipal boundaries, which will be the next step. And so that'll be looking at municipal boundaries and kind of assessing how representation is broken down on that level. And so I wanted to leave now some room for questions, and I'll leave the floor for folks who have questions.
Great, thanks. I see, I saw Bob Fanuzzi first and then Bob Bender.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for organizing a great presentation. And I'm a member of the committee. So this is a committee on racial equity. And I wanted to know if you had examples of either cases or pending cases or hypothetical cases in which redistricting has had an impact on racial equity, negative or positive. And I guess that's a question about whether your organization engages in litigation or whether you, I guess my first question is, after looking at your information, whether you are involved in any disputes, legal disputes about the impact of redistricting, and whether you promote only citizen engagement with the process. So the first question would be your process, your goals, and secondly would be an example of how this could have an impact on racial equity. Thank you.
Sure. The first part, we were involved, the case that I'll cite is the Favors v. Latford case. And that was a case that we were involved in the last cycle. And it involved a lot of the same issues that we discussed here. The maps were drawn in a way to disproportionately impact communities of color. And we were part of a coalition, a few litigators on that case that fought to have accountability in that map drawing process.
Were you a friend or were you a lead?
We were a part of the litigation team. I wasn't part of the team, so this preceded me. It was 10 years ago in 2012. So I wasn't a part of the team. I just joined recently this in September. So
Great.
I would have to dig in a little bit more, but that was
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you. Thank you for the example. And a current example of how you could, or a hypothetical example of how you could see redistricting having a negative impact. Would it be confined to gerrymandering, which is the most popular, most known method of disenfranchising?
Yeah, it would be, there's legally it's section 2 claim. So it's assessing how voter dilution, and that's a concept that speaks to communities of colors, whether it be Latino, Black, Asian communities, their vote being diluted. And there's legal standards that kind of define that. A hypothetical would be that they draw a district in a way to really limit the population in a way that their individuals of that community would not be able to elect a candidate of their choice. And there's a few examples. Litigation is ongoing, so this is a cycle that's been very active, but we're on the preliminary side. There's been challenges filed in Alabama and North Carolina, and those serve as some of the examples. Currently, like we do every cycle, we're assessing what kind of claims arise. Until the maps are finalized, a claim doesn't really materialize. So at this point, it's an advocacy campaign, and we do a double-pronged approach of we find community engagement and education to be a critical component of the work, and then litigation to be something that if it's done in a way to really disaffect, and there's a legal claim which has a completely different analysis that we're still kind of looking through. So at this time, we're not sure whether that claim will arise, and we've only seen proposed maps, so you can't really, there's no legal challenge that comes to fruition.
But New York State is in your view because of this redistricting we just went through.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Committee member Bob Bender, and then we can welcome David Gelman, who's a board member as well.
Thank you, Margaret. And thank you, Cesar. Bob actually asked the question I was going to ask, but I just want to be sure I've got the complete picture. So one of the ways in which your organization operates is to take part in litigation, as I understand it, as you just explained. And another is community engagement, as you just described. Does that describe the full extent of your activities, or is there more that you might be able to explain and elaborate on a bit?
Yeah, no, those are the two arms. We work with policymakers to kind of support, but within the redistricting realm, it's really focused on community education, engagement, and then litigation as a tool. These are all tools at our disposal to kind of assess what action is in the best interest of community members.
So when you say you work with policymakers, is that elected officials or other officials as well?
It's a combination of elected officials and community members. When you're looking at policy, it's a question of the individuals that are crafting the legislation, and then also what are the community needs around it. And so whenever we testify at city council hearings, or we testify at hearings to kind of advocate for community needs around redistricting, it's really been focused on the community education and engagement and the litigation, because the legislative cycle for any changes that would happen in this process is really, it's kind of like too little too late. It would be for the next cycle that like we would have to kind of perform some of the policy work behind it.
Mm-hmm. And as of now, your activities are confined just to New York State?
We're a national organization. I work within New York and Florida, but we service various areas throughout the country.
Oh, okay, very good. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Cesar, thank you for the presentation. The reason why I signed on tonight is because of exactly your topic. It seems like there's an inherent dilemma in what you are trying to accomplish. I mean, for example, the only way you can prevent racial gerrymandering is by conducting racial gerrymandering. I mean, for example, if a minority population is less than 10% of every county in the state, they're not going to get elected to state seats unless their districts get packed. And I know that's part of the dilemma of setting up the congressional and assembly and Senate districts. So I just don't know how one addresses that conflict.
So it's when you're drawing the maps, is a question of equity, and it's a question of racial gerrymandering is kind of distorting lines in a way that you pack or crack. There is a racial, like I had mentioned, there is a racial component. You're analyzing demographic information, you're analyzing voting behavior, and then you're analyzing like candidates of choice, and you're kind of putting the pieces together. A racial gerrymander, the only factor is race. With an equitable way of drawing redistricting lines, it considers all of the factors. It considers the geographic area, it considers the needs of the community, their social and economic desires, and kind of how that's represented in the process. And it's a more holistic, wide searching, as opposed to just focused on the role of race. And so there is a race component, but that's different than a racial gerrymander, where the sole focus is to diminish the vote of a racial minority group.
Ramdad, a committee member.
Hey, Cesar, thank you so much for that. And just to add on, Cesar, I think, so I was part of APA Voice, ALDEF's redistricting task force. So one example of racial gerrymandering was in Queens, in Richmond Hill, right? Richmond Hill was divided an area of like, with majority Guyanese, Trinidadian, and Punjabi people. They were sliced and diced into 7 assembly districts for the last 3 redistricting cycles. And that's what racial gerrymandering is. Whereas I know under the Unity map this time, Richmond Hill is under one assembly district, right? So that's one example of how racially a group has been disenfranchised through these redistricting and reapportionment measures and process. And David, I hope that added, like some background to your question.
And no, I understand that. I actually was not being critical of it. I just think statistically, you do need to do that so that you can get representation of minority groups that don't have that are in a minority and won't be able to get to a legislative floor.
Yeah, the distinction for the way, because the legal standard is that race can't be the sole factor. Race is a consideration. I mean, individuals, it's a part of their identity and their ethics, their values, and also their needs and kind of the gaps in the systems. But for it to be used as the sole factor, that's racial gerrymandering. And to Ramdat's point, that was an instance that we aim to correct within that Richmond Hill area to kind of reflect the population and give voice to the needs that have been ignored for several cycles. And so I understand the point that you're making, but I say it's racial gerrymandering is solely focused on the issue of a racial group and not considering really their ability to elect a candidate of choice, their community needs. It's not a holistic approach. It's really just focused solely on the basis of race, which is unconstitutional. And that's where a legal claim arises under Section 2, where race is used solely and to undercut racial minority groups' power to elect a candidate.
Understood. I was just using that as an extreme example.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a very complex and there are nuances. And this is why I think the community education and engagement piece is really important, because it gets murky. When you start to look at it, you can understand a little bit deeper, but from a bird's eye view, that distinction is not very clear. And I definitely can see and understand how individuals that are not even engaged, this is a process that happens once every 10 years. And so the way that we're able to engage communities kind of makes this process more transparent, which creates more equity across the board.
I do see Bob Fanuzzi's hand up in case that's new.
It is new. And I just wanted to thank David for his question, which is a fantastic conversation and discussion starter, because it really sounds common sense that there would be some peril. But what this exchange between Ramdat and Cesar is telling us is that there's actually different standards and paradigms that are more cross-sectional, intersectional, and we're not aware of this. So it's really important. I just want to ask if you could go through that again, Ramdat and Cesar, because it was so different than what we expected to hear, because we're used to looking at equity through a racial determinant. And can you just rehearse and go through that again, just for the sake of us who are learning? So thank you.
Sure, I want to see if I could find the slide that kind of.
And thank you, Ramdat, too, for your
the community of interest
example.
piece kind of magnifies that. When you define a community of interest, race and ethnicity can play a role in that. And that's the distinction there. It's not to say that we don't look at race, but it isn't determinative. We're looking at all of the factors that identify a community. And so while race is a factor, it's not the sole. And that's a legal standard that says that race can't be the sole factor in drawing the line. And so the confusion comes when you say that racial gerrymandering is inherently involved. And I think that's a lot of people's perception of it. But to this point, is a community of interest is defined as maybe race is a factor, but we're also looking at social, cultural, ethnic, economic, or religious kind of tendencies within this group to identify a grouping or a line drawing that kind of reflects that.
So it's against the Constitution to draw a district on the basis of race to maximize representation of a racial subgroup.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Wow. David, what do you think of that? Pretty,
Where there's a
this-
will, there's a way. And,
Yeah.
and I think that that's always a problem that we have with the commissions. And then what the legislature decides to do with those recommendations from the commissions after the fact. Our redistricting process for decades has been awful. And, this is certainly a step forward.
So you talked about testimony at one point about hearing people and their interest and needs. Is this is this a helpful way to determine interests?
Yes, so with the proposal, so there were several phases of it. There's the initial phase where commissioners had went throughout the state of New York and just listened as to like what community needs are and what are some of the considerations. And then they submitted their first proposal, which was a set of 2 maps. So there was the names and the letters, and then they went on a second tour around the state, allowing communities to be engaged in that process and speak to their community's needs. And then it went all the way throughout the state, and we are getting to the last hearing this Sunday at 2 p.m., which is an all state. And so communities have had the ability to say, the way that you drew these lines affected my community in this way. Here are some suggestions that we have. Advocacy groups like the Unity Map Coalition have submitted maps that are reflective of community members' interest, and we've engaged with community members and then also testified to that and supported and also encouraged our community partners and organizations and members to really be engaged in that process and speak to their needs. Nobody can define a community of interest much like the people that live there. And so a lot of our efforts were really helping individuals craft testimony. I had met with Margaret to discuss testimony around the area that she was servicing and kind of the needs and what are some of the troubles and ways that these lines could be drawn in a way to benefit the community members and the areas that they serve. And so that process is reaching ahead this Sunday, but it has been ongoing. And that is a way that the community can be on the record, they can say what their needs are and really engage with this line drawing process in a way that historically has not been the case. Because this is the first time we've had the Independent Redistricting Commission. Before it was just a purely legislative process, but now we're able to really have a voice and have visibility, which is something that we're hoping is transformational. And with this being the first cycle, we have good feelings because we were able to have strong showings of community members to define their own communities.
Thank you for that. Ramda, is your hand still raised or is it from before?
I have a quick question. Cesar, can you just talk about what happens on the municipal level for city council? You just talked about Congress, state assembly, and state senate, but how is it that the municipal level is much different than these 3 bodies?
And the municipal level, it goes through the mayor on a city-based level. And so it's a more localized process where the state involved us considering the needs of everyone in the entire state. The New York City process is more localized. So it's really focused on the needs of individuals that live within the city and then city council districts. So representation based on the city level. And that process begins kind of as this process starts to wrap up. That process is going to be beginning. So around like January, February, there's going to be a process of appointing commissioners that represent the citywide. And so there's advocacy to be done there about ensuring that representation on this commission is reflective of the diversity of New York City. But that's a more localized process. And we're really looking at city council and municipal level representation. So it's a smaller unit where congressional is representative of federal representation and the state legislative body is representative of both Senate and the assembly. This is a more localized process, and we're looking at municipal maps that were drawn in previous cycles and that we're going to produce for this cycle, reflecting the changes in population.
Camelia, I see your hand up.
Yes, it's kind of a follow-up to Ramdat's question, Cesar, and thanks for the presentation. It's a very engaging kind of philosophical debate, as you could tell from both David, I thought, and Robert Fanuzzi's kind of comments. But hey, we are here operating in a community board context, right? So, right following Ramdat's question in terms of the city races and district. Hello? hello, do you still hear me? I think I have
Yes.
low battery.
Yeah,
Okay,
we
yeah.
can still hear
So,
you.
so let me go straight to the question. So, we are here in the special committee on racial equity of Community Board 8. So, which would you? And we also have a report on the table that has now been drafted. It's now been and in its first draft version for like a year, a little bit over maybe. So we are wondering, I'm wondering, what elements of your presentation you think would be sort of potentially actionable at community board level, and what elements of your presentation we could highlight in terms of our opportunities to address in terms of our focus being Community Board 8. Are there any specific areas where we could pay more attention or we could be more engaged? Our Congress, Assembly, and Senate districts are slightly different, as are for everyone. Sometimes we spill into Yonkers, sometimes we spill into the east side of the Bronx. So of course, it's exactly there where these elements, the community of interest, quote unquote, kind of come into the conversation. So I was just wondering what would be your reflections in terms of a community board opportunities to advocate, basically.
Yes, I think the first actionable item would be this Sunday. There's an opportunity to testify if you have the capacity. Nobody knows your community quite like you do, and serving on the community board gives you a unique perspective. So it's something that gives you the opportunity to really speak to the needs of your constituents and the people that you represent. So this Sunday at 2 p.m. the sign up ends on Saturday, Friday at 3 p.m. I can follow up with like specific details, but that's an opportunity to be directly involved in the process and to have your constituency heard and your interest in the community that you represent. And then on the back end, it's really, creating resources, creating, community education and engagement events, having presentations like this and creating awareness. While the state cycle is kind of gearing up towards the end, there's still an opportunity within the municipal level to have folks involved and engaged. And so that opportunity exists. And with the commission being appointed, there's points of advocacy there to ensure that the new commission that's appointed on the city level is reflective of communities across the city and including your community. And so that's another, and then engaging with that process is going to be a similar process of, I think, hearings and testimony. And so there's opportunities within that framework to kind of have community input and also have items that are actionable from your community board. And they welcome testimony from all levels. This is a process that they want to be reflective of the entire community, and community boards are a microcosm of their community, and they really reflect that.
Thank you.
Bob Fanuzzi, is that still a hand or is that an old one? Okay, I'm gonna guess that it's it. Any other questions from the community? Any of the guests attending tonight? Any questions for Cesar before we conclude? Okay, great. Cesar,
And I just wanted to share some
go ahead.
Contact information for folks. As we move to the municipal, I admit it's been a very state-heavy redistricting process, but we will be shifting to the municipal level. And so if there's interest in kind of creating presentations or even resource sharing and being engaged in that process, I welcome you to contact me, and we can collaborate on ways in the future that we can kind of engage with this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Cesar. I'm sure it's been a long day for you, so we really appreciate you coming and providing this education to the community board.
Yes, thank you. It was great pleasure to meet. I'm going to share my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out. I'm always available, and this is solely the purview of my project. So I'm very passionate, and even working with Margaret was great to kind of identify and work through some of this. And thank you all. You've been incredible. It's incredible to connect with you all, and I look forward to future opportunities.
Thank you, Cesar. There's no chat function, so I can share it with the office, and then they'll distribute it through basically the listserv that goes out to the community.
Okay, Perfect.
All right, great. Thank you. Have a great night.
Same to you. And Margaret, if I could get a portion of the recording, I would like to just share it with, if that's possible. Or you can let me know where it's accessible.
Okay. I don't know the answer to that, so I can ask the office, and
Okay.
I'll include you on an email, send it to you tonight so that you all can be in contact. Okay.
If I can just,
Mhm.
sorry, Margaret, just to tell him, Cesar, all you need to do is send an email to the office and they will send you a link and then you can listen and select what you're interested in. I asked for recordings a couple of times and they are really great. The office is great at providing them.
Great. Thank you so much, Camelia. And I'll touch base with you about that, Margaret. Thank you, everyone. It was incredible. You all have a great night. I'm sure it's been a long day for you all too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so next steps. I feel like Julie is going to correct me on this. But are we ready to start discussing chairs and nominating of individuals? Is that appropriate? Is it not appropriate yet?
You're right on, because it's all business. We had discussed it. We
Okay.
started to discuss this, so you're right on point.
Okay. Okay, great. So from committee members, is there anyone, well, first of all, are we, where are we feeling tonight? Are we interested in nominating individuals tonight? Do we feel comfortable in sort of moving forward on a vote? It looks like someone has their hand up that I can't necessarily see who it
I'll
is.
leave you to committee business. Good night, all. Thank you for organizing.
Thanks, David.
I have the hand up, Julie.
Oh, go ahead, Julie.
I just wanted to nominate somebody who had a big hand in getting this committee on the road over a year ago, and I'd like to nominate Margaret as chair.
I would like to second.
Margaret, you do a fantastic job.
I couldn't agree more, Julie.
Any other nominations?
Acclamation. For a job well done. We need more meetings like this, and you can do it. Thank you, Margaret.
Shall we take a vote?
Oh man, that means Camelia is going to be on me on this report.
Don't worry.
It's going to take over my life.
It means more than that, Margaret.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're that's only the beginning. Can you have a vice chair?
Sure.
Sorry,
I nominate Julie Reyes for vice chair.
I'm seconding that.
I am thirding that.
All right, I think we should take a vote, Margaret.
Oh man.
Bob, would it be possible to have a single vote as a slate chair, Margaret vice chair, Julie? Or we need to do separate?
Let me recall my bylaws. I believe the chair has the responsibility to appoint. We don't vote. So let's get done with our committee vote on the chair, and then the chair can appoint.
All right.
It's in the bylaws that way.
That's
Yeah,
true.
I think you're correct. Yes.
I am.
All right. So that was a motion by Julie and then seconded by Camelia. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Vice Chair Julie, are you in this with me?
Let's get you elected as chair, and then you.
Yeah,
you don't-
let's get done with our vote first. Yeah.
you can
Okay.
figure it
Yes,
out.
yes.
Okay, sorry. So vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstentions? Nay. Abstentions? Can I?
Margaret, you can't
nay
abstain.
myself?
No, you can't. I saw that coming.
Okay, thank you. I hope to serve the community board well. I'd like to nominate, designate, what's the correct verb here? For
Appoint.
Ms. Reyes.
You appoint.
Appoint. Okay, thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you. You've done a terrific job.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on then.
Well, first, let's congratulate our new chair and our new vice chair. So you've both done a terrific job on this committee, and I'm glad to see that you're going to be chair and vice chair respectively, Margaret and Julie. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, a couple of old business items I wanted to just touch base on. One is, I know Ramdot, you had generously volunteered your time to look at census tracking, and I know that was something that Bob Fanuzzi and Bob Bender had also been working on. Is that something that we want to table, well, to discuss at a future meeting? Is there any update that we want to discuss tonight?
So I do apologize for not being at last month's the last meeting. It was just Diwali, and I had to celebrate with my family, so I couldn't be here. Upon my departure from APA Voice, I lost my access to census.gov, so I am looking to get someone in census, the department that I work with, to send me the breakdown via zip code, 10463 and 10471, based on racial makeup. But what I can, there has been an increase of different populations here in the 81st Assembly District, which kind of takes up the entire CBA, including Woodlawn and Wakefield. But if I'm waiting for that report to come in, so if you want, we can table it for now.
Okay,
And I do apologize for that.
it's okay. That's a big lift. I'm not sure whose hand popped up first. Let's just go Camelia, Julie, and then Bob Bender.
Yeah, Rhonda, just to point out, this commitment that you took is very, very significant. The census people sent, at least to my organization, sort of some things, but you probably already actually have the information. But my point actually was that you mentioned Assembly District. Please be mindful of the fact that seriously, with the whole Marble Hill area is not in Assembly 81 District, with the exception of probably 3 or 4 of the 11, I think, NYCHA buildings. And that district is very dense. It's 75% Hispanic and Latino. So I do think we have to go by the census tracts associated literally with CB8 and not by Assembly or Senate or whatever. So just wanted to kind of make that important observation, because otherwise we are excluding an entire neighborhood. So just, I'm sure you had it in mind, but just wanted it on the record, sort of say.
No, of course. I know the only buildings in 81 are Exterior Street, and then the other buildings in Marble Hill are 72nd AD. That's why I'm requesting it via zip code. And I will see if they're able to get that to me. It's kind of like confidential information. And because I left redistricting and redistricting work, I kind of like lost access to all of this very important information. So I'm trying to get it back somehow.
Thank you. Julie?
Yes, I heard you say 10463 and 10471. Just a reminder that 10468 is also within Community Board 8.
Okay, thank you for that. Bob Bender, and then Bob Finuzzi.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to say, Julie just said, there is a portion of 10468 that is within Community Board 8. It's the southernmost part of Kingsbridge Heights, just above Kingsbridge Avenue, is 10468. When I was doing this last year, I think it's, I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but I think it's the American Community Values Survey.
American Community Survey.
American Community Survey. Thank you, Bob. It does break down all the census data by census tracts. So, for example, you can go right into Marble Hill and get the information on the Marble Hill houses and see exactly as somebody said before, the density of the population there, the income level, et cetera. So I'll find that URL again and send that to you, Ramdot. But I know that that information is there and it is broken down by census tract, and it is really valuable information, and it is public and accessible. So I'll at least get you started on that, and I'd love to help out if I can. I don't want to overcommit.
And could you all just repeat the 3 zip codes, 10463, 68, and what's the other one?
71.
7-1.
Okay, thank you for that. Bob Finuzzi.
Ramdot, I wasn't sure about why you needed to work to get public data. And so that's my first question, because there's quite a bit of information already available. But more importantly, what do we want to do with this? We don't want to make work for just to justify what our name. So what would we be doing? I think last year the intention was to inform budget and district needs statement, and to identify disparities that may work into our work plan, the work that we actually do. But I think it's before we start looking at the update, which is really worth it, looking at how things have changed between 2010 and 2020 on the indices that we've already identified from last year on our spreadsheet. What would we use this for? I believe it was for budget, and also I believe in my committee we used it for service calls, where there were preponderant service calls for basic city services, mainly trash, but flooding in addition. So before we get to the data and access to the data, which is a very worthy thing, what can this committee do with it? And what do you think is a good use for our time?
Is that question directed to Ramdot, or is it just an open question?
Everybody, I'm sorry, I thought there was a break in the transmission. It was such deafening silence.
Right.
Usually my questions don't create an internet breakage, but I think I broke the internet here. But it's an open question, and it's an invitation for everyone to suggest what use we could put this new census information. Last year's was identifying disparities, getting a picture of our district, but also advocating at the budget level, which we did at several times. So is that the way we want to proceed this year? I'm just asking a question. I have no preconceived notion.
Well, Bob, I think having that data is valuable in and of itself. Knowing where the income disparities are located in the community board, just by itself is valuable information. It has a lot of implications, as you said, for instance, for ENS. We know that certain portions of the community board, for example, the 10463 zip code, are underserved in terms of parks, for example. We know that the question of housing affordability is more severe in certain census tracts than it is in other census tracts. The information, once you find the information, it actually, in a sense, almost impels you towards certain questions and certain realizations about the needs of different parts of the community. So, I would say simply having the information is valuable, but with the information in hand, and making comparisons from one census tract to another, you immediately see implications for the work we do on the community board.
Of course. So good. I'm glad everybody wants to keep doing that. And I think the more this becomes part of the strategy for how the board presents its district and its district needs, the better. Also, Margaret, I just wanted to suggest that we keep a close eye on the new administration and see if they're going to continue their racial equity analyses, which we talked about at length last year, because it does travel from mayor to mayor, but looking at what the new administration will do is really important. And the de Blasio administration migrated a couple of existing reports of poverty that were really helpful for understanding disparity, and they turned it into racial equity. So we should definitely keep an eye on, or have at some point in the new year, an update on how the new administration is continuing, if they are continuing racial equity as the kind of lens their resource allocation and the service distribution services throughout the city. So we saw the de Blasio administration really make a stand there. And I think we'll have to see if the next administration is going to do the same thing.
Thank you for that. Julia?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got on a work call, so I heard something about accessing data. I just wanted to make sure people were aware that there is census and ACS data available, raw data, not summary tables, available at IPUMS, IPUMS. I believe it's .org. That's what the data set I'm using for my dissertation. So that has the raw data. You would have to be able to do something with it. You'd have to know, but where the census website usually has like summary tables, if you needed to access the raw numbers, that's one way to get it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Julia, could you give us that URL again? IPUMS.org, is that what you said?
Yes, I will actually, I'll pull up my bookmark to make sure that's .org. It is actually USA.I, P as in Paul, U as in umbrella, M as in Mary, S as in Sam.org.
Excuse me.
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry, Julia.
Sure. It's USA, I as in igloo, P as in Paul, U as umbrella, M as in Mary, S as in Sam.org.
Rhonda, I saw that you just jumped back on. You might have dropped off. Did you catch?
Sorry, I got booted out. I'm sorry.
Okay. Julia was just sharing a website that has raw data that we may want to check out. But anything.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that basically covers it. And you can think about how to, well, you're waiting on data from whatever your sources are. And then we can talk about it at next meeting once you have a chance to sort of like regroup. Okay.
Awesome.
Julia.
Thank you.
Julia, were you is that a new hand?
No, but I just haven't figured out how to lower it. I'm used to taking meetings on my phone and not on the screen anymore. And so I feel a little,
Fair enough.
there we go.
We are all in a Progressive car insurance commercial, sooner or
So,
later.
So I know we're running a little bit over time here, but there's 3 last things that I wanted to cover. One is the standing committee agenda, getting on standing committee agendas. I had shared some of the, just by looking, sorry, someone is unmuted that I'm going to mute. No, you got it. Maybe not. So I had shared just by reading some of the minutes from all of the standing committees, I had put some bullet points together, sent it to this committee, got some feedback, sent it to the office. I haven't heard any feedback from any of the standing committees, so I'll follow up with the office just to see if they're, if anyone had any feedback or areas that I had missed, etc. But I think, I would love to hear from you all how we want to perhaps work with specific committees to help have a more overt conversation on efforts undertaken by the committee that help advance racial equity. I think all of the committees have tackled a few issues, and maybe there's some that could use some support, or maybe it's just a conversation, or maybe it's just the timing of things. So I wanted to hear from you all on recommendations on how we could perhaps advance some of those conversations. Bob Finuzzi. I'm guessing Bob's having trouble unmuting.
Margaret, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wanted to make an invitation. Well, first I'm going to discuss with my committee in December about a partnership and a dialogue around our budget process. And we went through a really rigorous examination of needs in the community according to the census data that we collected here. So, and environmental justice community delineations. So I think it's a natural partnership. I'll bring it up to my committee, and I'm sure they're going to want to have some kind of dialogue with this committee and see how we put together our priorities based on need. So I would look forward to maybe February, something like that, as we get moving on our budgeting.
Okay, great. Bob Bender.
One other thing I was going to suggest, Margaret, is that at the board meeting on the 14th, when you're called on to report on the committee, mention this information that that the committee is certainly wants to encourage all of the other committee chairs to consider equity issues in drawing up their agendas, and that we would be very glad to work with any individual committee chair on trying to figure out ways in which equity can be incorporated into the committee agendas. I mean, that I think is the best forum you'll have to get the word out to everybody at one meeting.
Okay. I think we have we have each of the committees covered by our committee members now, with the exception of Health and Human Services, unless someone is on that committee and I just don't know about it. Are any of the SCREE committee members on that standing committee?
Julia, are you on health?
No, I wound up stepping down because I figured with my job, I'd have to recuse myself from half the votes.
Oh,
and that
that's
was
right.
helpful.
Okay.
Margaret, the other committee we don't, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I didn't want to mess their quorum up by not being able to vote in half the thing.
Margaret, the other committee we don't seem to have representation on is Economic Development, but I think Camelia may be on that committee.
No, I've been there for the last 3 years, Bob, so we're good.
Oh, okay, good.
Good.
Yeah, I thought you were on that one. Okay, great. I think we have everyone then. I mean, we have each of the committee, we have representation on all of the standing committees. All right, if we could do some thinking about this and come up with some concrete ways that we feel like perhaps we could maybe report back at our next meeting, our next SCREE meeting, or maybe it's in 2 meetings from now, like you suggested, and talking about different topics that are coming before some of the standing committees. And if we're not able to make traction in certain committees, like how we might come up with, not come up with, but how we might identify some issues that we feel as though have been overlooked or maybe just haven't been prioritized that would be useful to the focus of this committee. Camelia?
Yeah, just wanted to add that, how to say, even, with our committee having been, well, before I was on it, but, through the transitions and it was difficult and we changed like 3 chairs and all that. I am hearing, even in the full board or in other committees, much more often references to equity issues and much more sensitivity to the racial aspect of our agenda topics than we used to. So how to say, simply by existing, it really makes a difference. One suggestion I had, Margaret, for the board, for the committee to consider is, for example, in our next full board meeting, to restate our expectation that the committees will continue to highlight this aspect of their work in their regular proceedings. And I don't know, maybe even, once every 3 months, we would approach chairs to give us a brief update. Could be like 2 sentences, honestly, but just for them to have this expectation that they would keep feeding information into this committee that is transversal across all other different functional committees, if this makes sense as a suggestion. Also, I must say, I was surprised to hear from the public. I was the other day in the last transportation committee meeting and we were discussing independence, I don't know, the bollards or the whatever it was, the stop sign. And then all of a sudden a community member says, we spent 20 minutes on Riverdale Independence Avenue and we don't speak about, I don't know, Cannon Place. So to me, that was very, and you can see that also in other committees. In all, to make this all balanced, also, I gotta say, we do have to at some point get a bit deeper into the shelter conversation. I know it's the hardest thing possible, but somehow we have to we are the ones that have to start charting a little bit the way, and either way, you know what I'm saying? In a very non-partisan way, to just have the conversation and help advance it. At the end of the day, it's full board that takes the decision, but we do have, a voice to make as a committee. So just wanted to put these things out there.
Bob Fanuzzi?
Margaret, I keep forgetting to lower my hand. I'm so sorry. But those are 2
That's
good
okay.
suggestions, and there is a need for new language, as we abundantly saw in the last go around at land use.
Great. Thank you for that. I did ask the office about the first Thursday of the month for our meetings. I understand that special committees usually do not meet frequently. However, because we've had so much transition and I think there's a number of things that we want to sort of get a bit of momentum on. I would recommend that we keep those meetings from now until June. And maybe we give up one of those dates But I would recommend that we sort of have some sequential meetings so that we can begin to plot out what our respective work is going to do. Like we know Ramdat's got this massive generous commitment of himself. But I would like to get us moving a little bit. And so I wanted to see what your thoughts were on that. So the first Thursday of the month, January to June is the proposal. Julie?
I would recommend that we not meet in January to give people first a break and give whoever's working on issues to give them time to do whatever work that needs to be done. But I definitely say let's skip January, because we're going to be attending whatever committees that we're involved with and can bring these issues to the committees.
Okay. Bob Finuzzi?
Margaret, do we still have an expectation of a report to the board at the end of each year? I think that was something we discussed last year, and that might be a way to schedule our meetings, knowing what our deliverable is. Is that
Yeah.
something that we're committed to still? I don't recall.
It's a good question. We also did commit to an event. It's kind of one of the last things that I did want to bring up tonight. I'll put a pin in it for now because Bob Bender has his hand raised. But that's a good question, Bob Finuzzi. I'm not sure. I'll have to go back to the report itself, which does require a revisit anyway. Bob
Yeah.
Bender?
Yeah, on that question, generally the special committees do issue a report every year on their activities. That has been the past practice. I have no idea whether that's in the bylaws or is a requirement, but I know I've chaired the special committee on the Hudson River Greenway for the last several years. And every year before the June board meeting, we do issue a report on what we've done over the year. So I do think it's a good practice, whether it's required or not. The other thing I was going to say, with regard to the meetings, as long as that date is available, I think it's a good idea to reserve it. We can always decide whether we feel that we need to meet that particular month or not. But knowing that it's available and asking the office to hold it for the committee, I think is a wise move. I had one other issue I wanted to bring up. I don't know if this is the appropriate time though, Margaret.
Let me just get to Julia and then I can come back to you.
That's fine. Thank you.
Sorry, just to add on the idea of a deliverable, it may also be worth starting to think, and Bob, please let me know. And is this a committee that we think should be moving towards being a standing committee and not a special committee? Because I know that's how youth started. Youth was a special committee and now it's a standing committee. And if we're going to move in that way, having a deliverable of showing the work and how much work it takes and how much work you're doing helps to build that. Not that we have to decide.
Julia, I think you put the question to Bob Finuzzi and myself. I am completely agnostic on that question. We've been going along as a special committee, and I think it has, for the most part, worked out. The real problem has been that for a variety of reasons, the chairs have not been able to continue as chairs. Roz because she moved, and Jill and Darius for other reasons. Whether we continue as a special committee or we become a standing committee doesn't really matter to me. I think we can get the work done that we've been discussing either way. So, you know, as I say, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. And, you know, I'm perfectly content to let others make that decision.
Agreed. I know that there are some other things like this doesn't count towards any of our committee requirements, and maybe, you know, like there are other things that maybe would open up membership, but you know, I thought you guys would have as longer standing members would have an idea of those kinds of implications that I can't think through at while I'm still getting calls from work.
It's a great question, Julia. And I was actually chair when we made youth standing, and it was a process. Altogether, it's a 3-month process because you're looking at 2 successive board meetings in which you're amending the bylaws. And it would take, I would say, a good 3 months lead time to get you to a decision in front of the board. And it would be a significant lobbying effort, of course, before that point. And there would be significant discussion at all stages. So I would say a 4-month process, starting in February, gearing up, you know, because you have to reach the end of the calendar and you have to have 2 successive votes and you have to calendar it. And the committee, you know, it would take about, I'm just saying the timeline, answer to your question, I would say 4 months to plan for standing committee status.
Camelia?
Yes, I'm just so happy with how the flow of this conversation, because everything is related. So, you know, when you have a gigantic task in front of you, you try to slice this into smaller pieces and sort of go one by one, small step by after small step. To me personally, I mean, what Julie said kind of blew my mind there for a second, because for me personally, if the only adjustment we make to the overall report that we have now on the table, which needs to be addressed, is even the contribution on the census data, that would be a fantastic achievement for the year. If we move forward with what Julie suggested, elevating the status of a special committee, or maybe I shouldn't say elevating, changing the status from a special committee that has to be renewed every year, saying, yes, we are still interested, to a standing committee that shows the community board overall commitment to this issue, again, going transversally, and this committee is here to stay. I mean, these 2 things alone would be tremendous achievements of this committee for the entire year. The census piece being incorporated, because let's not forget, it's a very timely moment, right? Like if we were considering this committee 5 years ago, we would have to have waited 5 years for a census, but no, it's just considered the year before the census. So it's very timely. So just the census piece in the overall report and the consideration to make it a permanent committee, it would be, yeah, I would feel extremely proud. But I also think that luckily we have Bob Fanuzzi with us who went through this process. So we have a guide. So it's extremely, like, to me, it feels like many elements align. So just thanks for everyone for this amazing inputs. Thank you.
I would just say that we're here to make a difference. We're here to make a change. And let's keep our eye on the ball and figure out what we want to do, how we want the census data to inform the community board and help the community board. And I think that's the most important thing because we've really adopted the census as our map for our community. And it's a fantastic tool for racial equity and equity analysis. So I would just say whatever we become, we always have to be, whether we are special or standing, our goal is always to inform community board practice and activities with the facts of our racial diversity in our community. So I just wanted to emphasize that either way, I think our goal is to contribute this lens. And it will take a couple of months to produce the momentum for it.
Okay, thank you, everybody. The last thing as I mentioned, the last thing I wanted to bring up was this event that we I think we referred to it in our initial report that we would have some sort of community event. And I guess, you know, obviously this committee was formed after George Floyd's murder. And in its wake, we've seen, you know, the hate crimes spiking in New York City against every population. You know, the Asian community, in recent weeks, we've seen swastikas in front of elected officials' offices comparing vaccine mandates to like Holocaust, to the Holocaust, and like children, young people committing hate crimes, you know, just like the full gamut of things. And so I wanted to throw this out of, you know, do we want to have a sort of convening event? Obviously, I think it would still need to be Zoom, all things considered, through the winter or even into the spring, or maybe, you know, depending on when we would have it. I don't know if ever we'll leave the Zoom meetings, but is this something that we want to revisit? Is this something that we feel like is important, or is the work at the committee level, working with standing committees, and getting, you know, the city to be providing the services it needs to in the community? Or is this something that we feel as though we have a role or want to at least provide people a platform? Julia?
So youth is trying to get together a resource fair. We're really trying to get it launched in the spring. If it is a virtual space, I would be more than willing to make a workshop or something devoted specifically to racial equity in that space, if that ends up being the most expedient way to meet.
Thank you. Bob Fanuzzi?
I think what you did tonight was so perfect and just hit our core, our committee's function so beautifully. So I don't know whether, I think a special forum like this, we need to really trumpet what we did here tonight and share the recording. I think this was just so perfect. It hit the nail on the head. So I would suggest maybe every third meeting, a special presentation like the one you did today. That has a unique, you know, analytical framework that we're trying to bring to the community board. And that if there, so that keep doing what we're doing. If there is an advocacy group, okay, we have to be the open, the welcome mat for them. That's not being heard locally, that doesn't have a forum. If there's a group that's gestating, that's being born, that needs support, a hearing, we should all be on the lookout for them. And because we know the groups that come to community board meetings. And so I think there are advocacy groups locally that really do need our support. So Margaret, I say, yes, we keep doing what you just did, but also if there's a community-based organization or even an unincorporated group that needs a hearing, we should suggest it to you.
Bender?
Yeah, Mr. Fanuzzi and I seem to be sharing the same wavelength tonight, because I was going to say almost the same thing with one difference. I think we should try to do what you did tonight, Margaret. We should aim to try to do that every month. And I know that's ambitious, but I want to go back to the last meeting where one of the topics we discussed was outreach or connecting, you know, however we want to phrase it, with different groups in the community, both faith-based and non-sectarian, that are doing this sort of work. We had a representative at, I think it was the last meeting, maybe it was the one before, for example, from the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition. They also take on the equity issue as part of what they do. And there are other organizations of that sort. What I think we ought to consider is finding out from the community board office what sort of list there is of organizations of this sort, advocacy organizations, faith-based organizations in the community, and inviting a speaker every month to the extent that that's practicable. And I hope it could be done every month, to come in and discuss equity issues, to talk about what kind of work they're doing. You know, exactly what you did tonight, Margaret, with Cesar Ruiz. And out of that might come some, let's say, some more concrete ideas for a forum down the line. I think to start out with the concept of a forum and then try to determine exactly what form it would take is backwards. I think it's better to bring people in to talk about these issues. And I think as we do that, we'll see if there is a way in which putting together a forum, with a lot of advocacy groups that operate within the Community Board 8 community, that's the way in which I could imagine going forward on this subject. I don't think we should feel compelled to have a forum, but I could see where it could be valuable if we can bring together some local advocacy groups and really address local issues. But I would love to continue this practice of bringing a guest speaker in every month.
Ramdot?
I second Bob Bender's idea. I love that idea. And unfortunately, I have to hop off. I have to go tutor a student online for my class. And I do apologize. I don't want to leave, but I have to hop off. So good night, everyone. And I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you, Ramdot. Okay, I think that's good feedback. I don't have anything else to cover tonight. Any other comments, items? Oh, Bob, excuse me. You had a thing that you wanted to talk about, and I said, let me come back to it, and I forgot about it.
I just talked about it.
Oh, okay.
That's what it was.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll volunteer to contact the board office and see what sort of information they have on local groups. And, I'll pass that information along to you, Margaret, and of course, along to everybody else on the committee. And, let's see if we can start to plan for the next meeting.
Okay, great. Bob,
Yeah,
finish?
Northwest Bronx clergy has a massive agenda, Bronx-wide, a social justice agenda, racial justice agenda. Everyone should take a look at it.
Okay, I know we ran super late. So thank you everyone for sticking with us. Any last comments, questions, follow-up items? Okay, well, thank you all for your time. Can I have a motion to close the meeting? Do we have to do that? Is that a thing?
Motion.
Camelia, and who seconded?
I'll second it.
Okay, thanks, Bob. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you all very much. Have a great
Thank
night.
you.
Good
Thank
night,
you, Margaret.
everyone.
It's a good
Thank you.
meeting.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Happy holiday.
Thank you, you too.